Hi sweeties, how are you doing? Welcome to Naya. Cimnanya, and thank you all so much for all the love and support. Hope you all are doing great. Today we'll be talking something very important, and I remember that I have brought something like this here, and it's about a black man that time talking about the highest plantation, like the biggest plantation that they never showed us, right? Which she said that was breeding plantation. I probably will look for that video and probably bring it back so you all we kind of say it. And when he talked about that, a lot really crossed my mind about breeding plantation, and we've talked about so many plantations, but it is kind of hard for us to talk about breeding plantation, and which was the very most profitable. Like I sat down and I was like, breeding plantation, where they made black people that look like me to breed without even thinking. All they just want is just for you to breed. And I am really scared of talking about this breeding plantation a lot, because I feel like a lot may have happened during that period. And there are some things we probably do not want to talk about, who are scared of talking about it. And it crossed my mind that during this breeding plantation, I felt like a lot of families, a lot of siblings, a lot of relations were all together in a plantation, and they probably ended up breeding together. I don't know if you understand where I'm going to, but you know what? Let's get into this video.
Something that kills me is that a lot of people seem to think slavery was just agriculture. Y'all realize slaves were everywhere, right? I mean everywhere. And that one of the most profitable forms of slavery were breeding plantations. 1806, when taking slaves off the shores of Africa was made illegal, we had probably about 1 million slaves here in the United States. Within like 4 decades, there was 4 million. Now we know typically the ratio is 50-50, right? Men and women. So really, let's say that's 500,000 female slaves, and it turned into 4 million. Breeding plantations. By the time a woman was seen as mature, by woman I actually mean child, this is when they start to menstruate. At that point, they were ready to be produced. Now, when a woman gave birth to her pups, because we were seen as animals and they were called pups, typically after nursing, they'd be, sent off. You had some plantation owners who would say, hey, if you give me 5 children, on that 6th child, I'll let you keep them and I'll free you. Now, I want you to keep something in mind. African Americans were valued more than all commodities in the North and South combined. So what that is, let's put it into more money terms, right? You give me $5 million, I'll set you free with a child. $5 million, I'll set you free with a child. That's really what that is. And there's not an actual price that was put on, person by person, but that's really what it is. Like, that's what it is. They knew that we were an extremely high value person. So something that's also interesting too is that the term motherfucker, where does that come from? Breeding plantations. Not only would slave owners forcibly impregnate slave women, they would also force other slaves. And in order to make sure that nobody knew, because if you saw that you were sleeping with your brother or sister, you're probably not going to be able to get an erection. They would put bags over the heads of both parties, and that's how the term motherfucker came to be. Now, something else to add on to this, because we're going to bring Christianity into the mix. Thou shalt not kill, right? But that's kill other humans, and because we were not seen as humans, it was perfectly fine to kill us. So just think about it. If you're an African American, we came from such a small group, about 350,000 people. And now look at how many there are of us. Which in my eyes is like, hey, that's a reason that we need to stop being so divisive within our own community. Because we came from such a small gathering, such a small community. We need to get back together. Some other cool, interesting facts, if you're still here in the video, is that you know how society, especially within our own communities, we hypersexualize like light skins? That is also from slavery. In fact, if one were more fair skinned, they would be used as a fancy. A fancy as a prostitute. Black women in general during the antebellum, just slave times, were seen as more inherently lustful as well. And it was almost every slave owner's dream to sleep with one of us. And you remember those large dresses that had the big bums and big, you know, like breasts? Those were modeled after black women because white men did not want to sleep with white women. They were seen as more modest and just not as appealing. With that being said, I'm going to close on the fact that, did you know that the average African American genome is about 15 to 25% European blood? Happy Black History Month. Not only would slave owners forcibly impregnate slave women.
Yes, 1,000%. And watch her video. When we speak about slavery, we need to speak about it in the truth and the actuality that it occurred. Because if we don't, we are denying the reality that they forced upon our ancestors. Too many times, when we speak about slavery today, we refer to it as almost a farming venture. It's just another capitalist business thing that happened. It was nothing less than torture, nothing less than generational, inescapable torture. You got to understand that this is what this country is built upon: the violence and the sexual exploitation of young women and children by the hands of white men. I'm talking about your Christopher Columbuses and all his other colonizer friends. Christopher Columbus himself had organized a system of trafficking and sexually exploiting young Taino women. These were children. The founders of what you know America to be today were child sex traffickers. And we're just getting started. We haven't even got to American chattel slavery. Think about this. If these people were willing to put our people in chains and beat them to death, what do you think they were willing to do to our children? Keep in mind, I'm not giving you a history lesson right now. This is right now, today. Where do you think these people have gone? Where do you think these values have gone? You think after the Civil War, these people just ceased to exist? You think after the Jim Crow era, these people just ceased to exist? This is happening right now, today, right in front of us. Our women are vulnerable. Our children are vulnerable. This is the world that we and our youth have been born into. We need to love, protect, and empower our people. Nobody will do it for us. Peace out.
Hypersexualized, like light skins, that is also from slavery.
Go watch the full video first, because it's certain shit that just gets re-cemented in my head. I don't even have the time to get into it like I really want to. I'm on my lunch break. Anyway, so this also means that when light-skinned men are coined as fuckboys, or light-skinned women coined as like hoes or whatever, that's also where that comes from. That's crazy. Everything, oh my god, that's insane. And it makes so much sense, but okay, y'all, we gotta stick together. We gotta stop calling each other shit. Stop calling our light-skinned men fuckboys and our light-skinned women hoes, and stop hating on our dark-skinned men and women. Like, come on, bro. Their plan for systematic oppression worked. It worked. They got us doing the dirty work for them now. It's in a book. They wrote about it. This shit is formulated out. And we are making the math.
Those profitable forms of slavery were breeding plantations.
I want to tell a story that's not super mine to share. I'll send this to him before I post it. I'll send it to him. My dad was born in 1962 in Tallahassee, Florida. His mom was Nettie B. And when Nettie B one day took my dad into town, he was about 7 months old. She was shopping around, and some lady came up and started complimenting my dad, saying like, oh, he's such a big boy. Oh, he's such a pretty boy. And he was real light. Melanin sometimes takes a minute to come into babies, and he was real light, and he was fair. And this lady just starts complimenting and coming up to Nettie and just being too close. And eventually the woman gets my dad. You knew it, that's where it was going. They get in a fight. The lady accuses Nettie of kidnapping my dad, that it was one of her friend's babies, that my dad wasn't Nettie's baby, right? That he wasn't hers. And so Nettie apparently gets aggressive and violent, and they throw her in jail for the night. I don't know how long this woman had my dad for, but Nettie had to rally the whole community behind her. She had to get the midwives involved. She got her pastors involved. She got every proof that she could find that that was her baby. She had to raise money and fight to get him back. Oh, sorry, I was trying to pause it to cry for a second. She got him back. And what this did is that my dad wasn't allowed out. My dad, as he got older, the only times he was allowed out of the house was for football. And as you know, little black boys get out of the hood, or got out of the hood in the 1960s through entertainment, incarceration, and death. My dad got out from entertainment. So now, fast forward, he was raising little black kids in a white neighborhood. And it clicked a while ago. My dad was such a helicopter parent, but he made us go do things on our own. I don't know how many times I would clock his Bronco and he would just check up on us. You know, he was just always there, and he was the dad who was just watching the kids play, and he was the dad who was having, and you know, he follows the bus to school. And what clicked for me is the ick I get when people compliment my kids. When they're just, you know, a little too over into enthusiastic on how cute my kids are. I just get the fuck away from my baby. And the way that I would never let them out of my sight. This wasn't that long ago. You know, it is so demoralizing when it's just it's not still in existence, or it wasn't that long ago. The ignorance behind the generational trauma of enslavement is beyond our understanding.
Something that kills me is that a lot of people seem to think slavery was just agriculture.
So, please do go watch the original video. It's got wonderful context. The only thing I will say, I don't agree with one of the phrasings that they used, because of the F word has a lineage there that may or may not have come about after Civil War times. And that may just be where it was agreed upon, it was a common word, and so on and so forth. So that's under discussion. But it's not important to this shit, because of it would make sense that they would use whoever they had and force and so on and so forth. So there's no... All this stated, one of the hardest parts about tracing lineage lines for African Americans, because you should be able to, due to the large size that Africa was, you should be able to trace back lineage lines of people. So you should be able to find your tribe, so on and so forth. And it becomes difficult because of slightly intermixing, so that's white people with, the African Americans. And then you see mass intermixing because of exposure and so on and so forth. And we quite literally know that they were selective on who, they did what. And I'm going to remind everybody before anybody says ever again to me that, the separation between women's sports and men's sports. Motherfucker, I'm African American. Men and women were in the same fields doing the same job. You can go fuck yourself. Kind of terms like that. All that stated, mass breeding had to have happened because of our numbers of increase as they went along. Because at some point in time we get cut off of being allowed to import slaves. Multiple nations put this into their billing and so on and so forth. Including apparently Texas needs to be aware that at some point in time Spain did this too. And that is likely why the Alamo really went down. Spain came forward and told the people who left the America colonies, or Union colonies, to come over to Texas and became Spanish colonists, married into rich families, provided certain things, land, including slaves, were told, well, we've decided that we will no longer allow slavery. And that's when they had to fit. I've got to go more detail on this, and if they were told this, then the entire gun statement, don't take my gun by the cannon thing, has even a worse joke of it wasn't about that. Now, we do know eventually Texas breaks off from whenever it did become a part of the Union because of slavery was not going to be allowed here. But they didn't have the same flooded numbers, as far as we can tell. But when we see these regions that did have them, the numbers of people in these zones, and the fact that they have trade listings for children that they would sell. Because that's another thing that in the other video. The horrible side of what the Nazis learned, Yazis, I'm going to get in trouble for that, saying that, learned from both slavery and the Jim Crow laws was keeping record. Because there was a large amount of record kept for slave trade. And it wasn't always a name because they didn't want to bring them to a name. They didn't want to apply them to humanity. But we did a really good job of fucking keeping track of who was sold where and where they started from. That last name thing was a very important, this is the echo from where it came, and it would be sometimes your master's name. That is mind-blowing to look into when you start looking at, oh my god, when you want to trace your lineage lines, you can trace where the jumps go around and where family was spread around in other places when the sales dates went down. The arrival dates, the reason that we see arrival dates so hard from Africa to here is because there was start of a discussion about taking from there to bring to here. And that is because certain nations just literally told you fucking no. Just straight up, no, hell with that. Because of the way it was handled. It was not being brought forward a respectable way. And they also had the indentured servitude systems that had existed, and they even brought it to India. Did they respect India very well? Fuck no. But they at least had a different way that they slightly treated it versus what we were getting over here. America's very much the dark path of slavery that was here is completely different to variants in other places. Now, mass graves exist. Lineage lines could get cut. The other problem was eventually when colonization starting to get heavier in Africa because of after they try to cut them off, they basically fucking invaded. You get whole tribes just wiped the fuck out. And you get unification tribes that try to fight back. So multiple tribes fusing together. So you lose lineage line. You lose land areas. And you can't easily trace by genetics all the time. Specifically from the Afro-American side, which would need a massive flood of treatment and tests to do. And it's not been done heavy enough. It's not. Because if it was, we would never call an Egyptian ever anything like a Greek, because if they had DNA tests, they'd be like, oh, nope, they've got this lineage from this directive. Why would we say this person's a Greek? And we get why is because of, like, the Greeks likely were pale of skin in more abundancy than they were not. So we're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. For people who were assholes and were at one point in time writing history for us. I'm not doing this justice. I know I'm not doing this justice. But the amount of genetic spread and focused genetic spread was insane. Selective breeding, people who survived because of... You would beat somebody to death that wasn't worth it. And you're like, oh, well, I just lost out on the money. Or you would beat them part of the way to death and send them to a mine to die, from constant work instead of, like, slightly respectable. It's fucking not. You were at least given a house and blah, 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 and you were still expected, and you can still get your ass beaten to the level of, like, flesh from skin. While the mines were nearly 24 hours because they didn't care. These people were not considered people, so on and so forth. It's horrific to think of. My head's already killing me there. But we do know from what we see of African American direct descents in our sports leagues and so on and so forth, we see larger muscle structures, men and women. we see more advancing strength, so on and so forth. It's because of what was happening from that horror fest that was slavery first, and then Jim Crow was forcing more people to continue to do certain jobs. And so you start to understand, we genetically gained from this. We were genetically altered from this. And the mixing between tribe people that would have normally was massive. That's why you see a variance of like size. There were pygmy people that would have also been picked up. And there are pygmies over near tribes that are tall as hell. Mind you, eventually those tribes actually got contacted by monitors basketball and used the basketball sourcing. Because, mentally that's okay thing to do. I just want to win because we got tall people that jumped high. Yeah, sports still has a thing for me. All this stated, there are so many layers to this, and I couldn't pull this off in 10 minutes. Please do go watch the original video. There's very little that I would say disagree with. There's a lot I agree with. I am African American. Well, I'm very mixed. And knowing that I'm very mixed means that I have a lot of sources that are a pain in the ass to trace. Be well, do well.
That I'm writing an album called The Middle Passage. They've shown us every plantation with cotton on it. You know what plantation they've never shown us, Abby? The most prominent ones. The ones that were most profitable. The breeding plantations. Why don't you want to show us those? You know why? Because after the research that I did for this album, you realize that the moment that a girl menstruated, she was put in a stable where a horse would be and forcibly mated, forcibly raped by a male of the slave master's choice. And when she had children, they weren't called children, they were called a litter of pups. The punishment for raping or killing a person in medieval Spain is gelding. Gelding is when you take hot pincers and you take a man's balls and dick off root and stem. Killing a person, law of the Bible, right? Medieval Spain, super religious. You killed a man, he should be killed. Why? We're indigenous and black people, categorized as subhuman. So under the law, you would not be punished for the things that you did to us. That's why. You used to be proud, right? Used to be proud, white America, of rape and murder. Used to be proud of colonization. Used to, wow, that made us tough. And then you got ashamed of it. And that's what you're dealing with. That's what America's dealing with, a schizophrenic crisis. There's a British manual, right, that was taken out of the British Museum because within the manual, it talked about how rape was a weapon of war that should be used against the indigenous population. You're ashamed of that now. You're ashamed, right? Who was Christopher Columbus? His image has been so whitewashed, but he was trafficking little girls on an island. Who does that sound like, huh? All you right-wing defenders of Christopher Columbus and his legacy, he was trafficking 9-year-old indigenous girls on an island. Who does that remind you of, you intellectual coward? Just because liberals are dog shit doesn't mean that you shake hands with the devil.
So this is all I got from this, and I remember there was a time I brought something here about a young black man who was talking with a colored person, telling them that the biggest plantation ever, that is the plantation they never showed anybody or talked about a lot, was breeding plantation. And a lot of people don't. We talk about so many plantations. We talk about the cotton. We talk about all the agriculture and all that. But we don't talk about the main plantation. And that is the plantation that was the most profitable plantation ever. And that is the plantation that they are refusing to show us, breeding plantation. You all know a lot happened during that time, slavery and all that, when they were importing human beings, and all of a sudden they were like, we can't keep doing this, like, trying to like travel how many years or something, then come back again, like, to start. Then they were like, how are we supposed to do this? And that was when breeding plantation, they were like, okay, breeding plantation, and they started breeding. Do you know one thing about, like, there are so many times I have sat down and talked about, Abby, sat down and thought about a breeding plantation. And a lot really occurred to me, a lot came to my mind. And I was like, why, what if families, families might actually be in the same plantation together, or siblings or relations. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, might be in the same plantation together, right? And because I knew that some families were captured and taken and all that. And what if brothers and sisters were probably during that time were kind of probably stayed together, or cousins or something, did something together, and maybe something happened and there is a baby. So many things has really came to my mind when it comes to breeding plantation, because all they wanted was just to breed. They were not wanting to it was just for their own profit, and they were not talking about other people's welfare, like the people breeding it. All they just want is just for you to breed. So a lot of things used to come to my mind, what if families, and I feel like this really happened, but just that we are not talking about it, or it's something like we all refuse to talk about, or something we cannot say, like, God forbid, maybe it never happened and all that. But I knew for sure that something like this may have happened or happen in breeding plantations, like siblings being together or cousins being together just for them to breed. And then when I think about all these things, I feel like somehow we all are all connected, But then I don't want to go into that. But one thing I know is that they keep hiding this breeding plantation from us because they know that was the most profitable plantation ever. Forget about cotton plantation, agricultural, the farming and all that. Breeding was the highest of the highest. And that's why today they don't even want to talk so much about it. That is all I got for you. Let me know what you all think in the comment section. I'll see you all in my next video. Bye for now.